The arena was vast, carved from black stone and glowing with alien symbols, as if the walls themselves remembered every fight that had spilled blood on its floor. High above sat thousands of alien spectators, sharp-eyed, cold-blooded, many of them warriors themselves, watching a single human step forward under the harsh lights. Jace Corin, a soldier from Earth, stood with nothing but his own fists and a dull blade given as a formality. Captured during a failed peace mission, he had been told that today's battle would decide his fate, though he already knew what that meant. Either he'd die for their entertainment or win the right to live, only to be thrown into the next realm like a toy surviving too long. He looked up toward the royal platform, where the Emperor of the Zircon Empire sat, surrounded by guards in red armor, his 4 eyes fixed coldly on the human below. Beside him, in a high back chair made of silver and bone, sat Princess Valara, her skin pale blue, her long dark hair braided in coils like ceremonial armor. No one expected her to rise, not when the gates were already opening and the hulking beast gladiator was stepping into the arena, its 6 limbs dragging axes behind it. But she did rise, her voice clear and strange, ringing across the walls and silencing every breath in the stands. Human, when this battle land you win me, time seemed to freeze. Even the beast stopped, blinking in confusion. The guards looked at each other, unsure if this was a joke or rebellion. Jace felt his pulse spike, not from fear, but from shock. He didn't know if she was mocking him or challenging the Empire itself, but in that moment, the crowd was holding its breath, and all eyes were locked on him. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. The gate behind him slammed shut, and the beast moved again. It roared, blades slicing through the air as it charged forward with bone-shaking speed. Jace ducked, rolled, felt the wind of death pass inches above his head. He knew he was outmatched in size, in strength, in weaponry, but he had one thing that no one in the arena understood: desperation sharpened by memory. He thought of Earth, of the little photo tucked inside his suit's chestplate, his sister, Nia, smiling in front of their broken-down house, promising she'd be strong while he was gone. That image burned behind his eyes as he dodged again, barely escaping a spinning strike that cracked the stone floor. Jace had studied alien anatomy on long flights. He remembered pressure points, joint weaknesses, and most of all, rhythm. These creatures fought with fury, not precision. He used that. He waited. He moved. He let the beast get tired, swinging wildly as bloodlust clouded its mind. Jace started under its arm and stabbed into the back of its knee, not deep enough to kill, but enough to slow it. It howled, spun, slammed a fist into Jace's shoulder, sending him tumbling. Pain exploded down his arm. He bit back a scream, pushed himself up as the crowd began to murmur, not laughing anymore, not mocking, watching. The princess leaned forward, unreadable. The Emperor said nothing. The beast, limping now, came again. Jace dropped his blade and ran toward it. The crowd gasped. Was he surrendering? No. At the last second, he slid low, sweeping the injured leg. The beast collapsed with a roar, crashing to the ground. Jace grabbed his blade, climbed its back, and drove it into the creature's neck once, twice, 3 times until the body stopped moving. Silence. The crowd didn't cheer. It waited. The Emperor stood slowly, face like stone. But before he could speak, Valar arose again. "This human has won," she said, voice firm. "And so has my word." Jace looked up at her, blood dripping from his hands, unsure if he had just become a hero, a rebel, or a prisoner with a bigger cage. The gates opened again, but this time not for another fight, for guards to escort him out. No one dared speak. No one dared stop the princess. And as Jace was led from the arena, wounded but walking, he glanced back once more at the platform and saw her watching him, not as a prize, not as a ruler, but as someone who had just changed everything with one sentence and one fight. Jace sat in a cold metal cell, his shoulder burning with pain and his hands still stained with dried blood. But his mind refused to rest as the memory of Princess Valar's words echoed again and again. Win this battle, and you win me. And though he didn't fully understand her reasons, he knew that what had happened in the arena isn't just about survival anymore. It had become something much larger, something that was drawing attention from all corners of the Zircon Empire. Outside the cell, alien voices spoke in low, tense tones, and heavy boots passed by without stopping, as if even the guards didn't know what to do with him now. Was he still a prisoner or something more? Hours passed before the door hissed open and the princess herself stepped in, alone, dressed not in royal robes, but in a cloak that barely covered her identity. Her expression was unreadable, but her voice was quiet, almost gentle, as she told Jace that the Emperor had been furious and that the next fight had already been arranged against Kravos, one of the Empire's elite champions, a towering soldier, enhanced by cybernetics and ruthless training. Jace's heart sank, but he said nothing, watching her eyes as she explained that this next battle wasn't just for honor, it was a test to prove whether the first victory was a fluke or something real. Valara hesitated, then stepped closer and asked why he fought the way he did, why he didn't use hate or rage like the others. And Jace, tired and bruised, told her a simple story about Earth, about his younger sister Mia, about the promise he made to return to her, and about how every move he made wasn't for glory but for the ones who had no power, the ones waiting in silence back home. For a moment, Valara looked away, as if the truth weighed heavy in her chest, and then she whispered that she believed him, that she wanted him to win, not for her, but for something greater. When she left, Jace was taken into the prep chamber, where aliens cleaned his wounds roughly and handed him a short spear, the only weapon allowed this time. The gates opened again. The crowd was louder than before, some cheering, others booing, but all watching. Across the arena stood Kravos, a massive figure with metal plates on his arms, glowing red eyes, and a battle axe taller than Jace himself. The moment the signal was given, Kravos charged like a storm, every step shaking the ground, and Jace barely had time to roll aside, the axe crashing down and leaving a crater where he had just stood. He stabbed with the spear, but it bounced off Kravos' armor. Useless. The champion laughed, a deep mechanical sound, and swung again, missing by inches. Jace knew he couldn't win with strength. He had to find a crack, a weakness, anything. The fight turned into a chase, with Jace dodging, bleeding from a cut on his forehead, ribs aching, and the crowd beginning to chant the champion's name. But then something strange happened. Jace began to speak not to the crowd, but to Kravos. Between breaths and dodges, he asked him if he was proud of what he had become, if he remembered why he first picked up a weapon, if he still felt anything when he fought. Kravos didn't answer at first, only attacked again and again, but Jace didn't stop talking. He told him that real strength wasn't just muscle and metal, it was choosing what to fight for. Kravos slowed. His eyes flickered, the axe wavered. Jace took the chance and slammed the spear into the joint of Kravos' knee, the metal cracking slightly. The champion dropped to one knee. Jace pointed the broken spear at his chest, but didn't strike. The crowd fell silent again. Kravos looked at Jace and, for the first time, spoke. You fight like a human, and I envy that. He dropped his axe. But before anything else could happen, a flash of silver came from the royal booth. One of the Emperor's guards, furious at the dishonor, leapt into the ring and stabbed Kravos from behind, betraying the sacred duel. Jace caught him before he fell, rage and confusion clashing inside him, and shouted at the crowd, at the royal box, asking if this was their honor, if this was their justice. And then Valara stood again, her voice fierce and fearless, declaring that she would not let this act go unpunished, that she would no longer stay silent while truth was crushed under the boots of tradition. The Emperor shouted orders. Guards swarmed. But Valara jumped into the arena beside Jace, her own guards frozen in shock, and she took his hand in front of everyone. Together, they ran, slipping through a side gate as chaos broke out behind them. They were fugitives now, an alien princess and a human warrior with the entire empire watching and hunting. But for the first time, Jace felt something other than fear. He felt the spark of something bigger, something that might change everything. Jace and Valara ran through the underground tunnels beneath the arena, their footsteps echoing as alarms blared far above and angry shouts bounced through the air like warning drums of an approaching storm. The scent of stone dust and old blood lingering around them like a memory they couldn't shake off. Jace gripped the stolen blade tighter in his hand, his muscles burning from the fights and the run. But he didn't stop, not even for breath, because he knew that if they paused now, even for a second, the Empire's hunters would catch them, and he would never see another sunrise, never keep the promise he made to his sister back on Earth. Valara moved beside him with surprising speed, her royal cloak now torn and dirty, her hair loose and wild, and her face no longer calm like a princess but fierce like a fighter who had made her choice and could never turn back. She led him through tight paths only she seemed to know, whispering directions when they had to hide or climb or crawl. And though Jace wanted to ask her why she had risked everything for him, for a human, he kept silent because her eyes already held the answer. She saw something in him that her world had forgotten, a soul that still believed in right and wrong. When they finally reached a small chamber lit by pale crystals, she collapsed onto a stone bench and told him that their escape had triggered something far greater than just a manhunt. The Emperor had called it betrayal. The Council had declared war on her name, and elite assassins were already on their trail. Jace sat across from her, trying to understand what it meant, this strange bond they had forged in blood and silence. And as she wrapped a cloth around his bruised shoulder, she asked him what gave humans the strength to fight even when they had no hope. He didn't answer at first. He just looked at her and said, "Because we can't stand still when something's wrong." Valara nodded slowly, as if the answer had been buried inside her all along. The walls shook suddenly with a distant explosion, and both of them stood. At once someone had found them. They moved again, deeper into the old tunnels where the dead ruins of a forgotten civilization whispered secrets through crumbled pillars and faded carvings. And it was there that Jace saw something strange. An ancient mural showing two figures, one tall and blue-skinned like Valara's people, and one clearly human, side by side against darkness. Valara stared at it too, stunned, and whispered that this wasn't just a hiding place, it was an old forbidden site, a place her people called the Tomb of the First Bond, a legend they were told to ignore. Before Jace could ask more, footsteps echoed behind them, fast and heavy. 3 assassins in black armor entered the hall, weapons drawn, eyes glowing under their masks. Jace stepped in front of Valara without thinking, heart pounding, blade ready. The assassins attacked at once. Jace blocked the first strike, twisted under the second, and stabbed the third, but he was outnumbered and tired, and they were trained to kill without hesitation. One of them slashed across his side, and he cried out, falling to one knee. Valara screamed, picked up a broken piece of metal, and threw it. With perfect aim it struck the mask of one assassin, cracking it. That was enough for Jace to recover, spin, and knock the enemy to the ground. The other two hesitated as he stood again, bleeding but still standing, eyes burning with something stronger than pain. "I'm human," he said, breathing hard. "We don't back down." The assassins came again, but this time, Valara joined the fight. Her moves were sharp, trained, and graceful, and together, they pushed the attackers back until they fell one by one. Jace collapsed afterward, barely conscious, and Valara held him, whispering that she wasn't going to let him die, not after what they had started. She pressed a glowing stone into the wound on his side, a healing relic she had taken from the royal vault before their escape, and as it worked, she told him that the Empire feared humans because they couldn't control them, couldn't understand why they kept fighting even when they had no reason left. Jace smiled weakly and said, "It's not about winning. It's about never letting them decide who we are." She looked at him, and something shifted in her eyes, not duty, not royalty, but something warmer, something real. As the healing light faded and his strength slowly returned, they knew they couldn't stay in the ruins. They had to move, to reach the outer colonies where others who hated the Empire's rule might still listen, might still help. But more than that, they had to carry the message that a human and a Zircon princess had stood together in defiance, and that maybe, just maybe, the galaxy didn't belong to tyrants anymore. As they stepped back into the shadows, hunted but unbroken, Valara whispered the words she hadn't said before, not a promise, not a vow, but a truth. You're not just a warrior, Jace, you're the one with a human soul. And he walked beside her, silent but proud, knowing the fight was only beginning. The cold wind of the outer colonies bit into Jace's skin as he and Valara stepped out of the ancient tunnels into a dusty world lit by twin suns, far from the shining towers of the Empire's core, a forgotten place where broken ships lay half buried in sand and rebels whispered their anger in secret. Valara covered her face beneath a hood, and Jace moved with a limp, the pain in his side still there, but ignored, because every hour that passed meant the Empire's hunters were closer, and if they failed to act now, all their sacrifices would be for nothing. They made contact with an old resistance group known as the Flame of Eryx, a scattered band of outlaws, ex-soldiers, and thinkers who had once tried to overthrow the Emperor but were crushed and scattered. Now their eyes studied Valara with suspicion and Jace with confusion, for in their world, a princess and a human walking side by side made no sense. Jace told them what had happened, the rigged fights, the betrayal, the forbidden mural of human Zircon unity, and at first, no one believed him. But when Valara stepped forward and exposed the royal mark on her shoulder, silence spread through the room like a wave. She declared the truth out loud, saying that the Empire had lost its honor, that it no longer stood for strength or order, only for fear and control, and that she no longer served it. Still, the rebels were unsure until the assassin's blade came in the night, a blur of metal aimed for Valara's throat, and Jace intercepted it with nothing but a broken chair leg, forcing the masked killer back until the others joined in and brought the enemy down. Only then did they begin to trust him, the human who fought not for power, but for someone else's life. Over the next few days, the rebels revealed their hidden base, deep in the wreckage of an old Empire warship, where systems still flickered and maps of old battles lined the walls. There, Jace trained with the fighters, showing them human methods, quick thinking, unpredictability, heart-driven action, and they taught him too how to fight as one unit, how to use the terrain, how to adapt. Valara studied the Empire's communication codes, intercepting messages, and soon discovered a terrifying truth. The Empire had sent its newest creation after them, not just soldiers, but a machine built to hunt and crush hope itself. Unit Prime, an AI-driven war entity, with no fear, no mercy, and a full squad of weaponized drones, set to arrive within 2 days. Some rebels wanted to run, others to hide, but Jace stood up and said something simple that cut through the fear like a blade. If we run now, we'll always run. But if we fight and fall, we light a fire they'll never forget. Silence followed, then slow nods, and preparations began. The rebels set traps around the canyon near their base, rigged explosives, and readied weapons. Valara reprogrammed old turrets using her royal codes, and Jace stood with her that night under the stars, speaking of Earth, of music, of oceans, of his sister, and Valara listened with wonder, saying that she had never known what love really looked like until she saw it in his eyes. When the dawn came, the ground trembled as Unit Prime arrived, tall, silver, soulless, with glowing red sensors and drones that flew in a deadly swarm above, and the battle began. Explosions rocked the canyon, smoke and sand filled the air, and fighters screamed commands over the radio. Jace fought like a ghost, moving through smoke, drawing the drones away with noise and fire, destroying them one by one with traps he had made using nothing but scraps. Valara, from a high ridge, used a stolen control chip to blind the machine's targeting systems for a few precious seconds, and during that moment, Jace got close enough to leap onto the machine's back, plant a pulse grenade, and fall away, just in time as it exploded in a burst of fire and sparks. But Unit Prime was not finished. Its metal body stumbled, then righted itself, now walking directly toward Valar's position, weapon spinning, red light flashing. She tried to run, but slipped on the edge, and the machine raised its cannon, but Jace was there, blooded, gasping, and he stood in front of her. No weapons left, just his fists. "Come on," he growled at the thing. "Let's see what your programming says about this." The machine scanned him, calculating, and fired. But at that very instant, one of the rebels, a young woman named Kirau, who had lost her brother to the Empire, fired a rocket from behind, striking the machine's power core, and it finally collapsed, its red eye fading to black. The silence that followed was heavier than any roar. Jace dropped to his knees, alive, but barely, and Valara caught him before he fell. Around them, the rebels cheered, cried, raised their fists not just for the victory, but because for the first time in years, they had felt something more powerful than fear: belief. Later, as the sun set on the ruined battlefield, Valara stood before the rebels and named Jace not a hero, not a symbol, but a leader of heart, someone the Empire could never break because he fought not with anger, but with a soul. And Jace, resting against the old warship's hull, whispered to himself that maybe, just maybe, the human heart still had a place in this galaxy of machines. The smoke from the battlefield still lingered in the air as the survivors gathered in silence, staring at the burnt wreckage of Unit Prime, the Empire's most feared creation, now just twisted metal under the dying suns of the outer colonies. And Jace sat quietly against a broken wall, bruised, bleeding, but breathing, while Valara knelt beside him, holding his hand like it was the only thing keeping her steady, for in that one moment, she knew everything had changed, not just the battle, not just her heart, but the path of to entire civilizations. News of their victory spread like a shockwave across the stars, carried by stolen signals and rebel transmissions, and whispers began to rise in every corner of the Empire. The princess had turned, a human had won, and something new had begun. The Emperor, seated high in his throne room surrounded by the hollow loyalty of his court, received the reports with cold fury, his face unreadable behind the royal mask, but those closest to him saw his fingers tighten on the edge of his chair. For the one thing he feared was no longer a machine, it was an idea. Jace and Valara spent the next few days healing, organizing, preparing the flame of Eryx for what was to come, because their victory had not gone unnoticed, and retaliation was certain. But Jace had changed. He was not just a fighter anymore, he was a symbol, a living story of hope, courage, and the impossible bond between two hearts from different worlds. Valara saw it too, and late one night, standing on a cliff above the rebel base, she looked into Jace's eyes and whispered the words she had once said in the arena, but now they meant something deeper, something real. "Win this last battle, Jace, and you win more than just me, you win a future." And he nodded, not with pride, but with a quiet fire in his soul. Together, they sent messages to other rebel cells, to hidden scientists, to workers who had once suffered under the Empire's rule. One by one, answers came in: yes, 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 and ships began arriving, old and scarred, but full of fighters. The princess's name, once used to crush rebellion, now called them to rise. Meanwhile, the Empire moved fast. A fleet of warships, 10 times larger than anything Jace had seen before, began its journey toward the rebel world, and at its head was the Iron Crown, the personal flagship of the Emperor himself. Valar knew what this meant. He wasn't just coming to destroy them, he was coming to erase her, to end the idea that a human and a Zircon could fight as one. The rebels had no chance in open space, so they prepared the old warship where they hid the gauntlet for one final stand. Engineers worked day and night, reprogramming systems, welding armor, and adding anything they could find. Jace trained the new fighters, showing them not just how to shoot or strike, but how to think, how to move with instinct, how to trust. And as the stars above grew darker with the approach of the enemy fleet, the final day arrived. The battle began with silence, a stillness in space so deep it felt like time itself held its breath. Then the Iron Crown opened fire. The gauntlet roared back, unleashing every cannon, every drone, every last bit of resistance, and fighters launched in waves, weaving through enemy ships like sparks in a storm. Jace flew with them, guiding the attack from the front, using every trick, every move he'd learned through blood and pain. Valara, inside the gauntlet, coordinated the defense, her voice calm, her eyes cold with purpose. But the Empire had numbers and power, and soon the gauntlet's shields began to fall. Just when all seemed lost, a signal came from deep space, a swarm of ships, civilian and stolen military, answering the call of freedom. They crashed into the Empire's flank like a wave, giving Jace one final opening. He broke through the outer line, flying straight toward the Iron Crown, dodging fire, chased by 3 fighters, and somehow through skill, instinct, and sheer human will he made it. The crown's hull cracked under his assault, and inside, the Emperor stood watching, still calm, still proud, until the ship began to burn. He tried to escape, but Valara, watching from afar, gave the final command, seal the escape bays, and just like that, the Emperor was gone. The battle ended, with silence again, but this time, it was peace. The Empire's fleet retreated, its core destroyed, its ruler lost. Across the galaxy, screens flickered with one message: the war is over. The people have won. In the days that followed, the stars saw something new: a gathering of worlds, once divided, Zircon and human, sitting at the same table, speaking not as rulers and rebels, but as partners. A council was formed, not ruled by blood or title, but by voice and truth. And at its heart stood Valara, once a princess of power, now a leader of peace. Beside her was Jace, not a king, not a warrior anymore, but something more rare, a symbol of what could be. On the day the treaty was signed, she took his hand, looked to the crowd, and repeated the words that had started everything: "This human won the battle. And in doing so, he won my heart." The crowd roared, not just for them, but for the promise they carried, the promise that even in a galaxy filled with war and machines, it was still the human heart that could change the stars.